Welcome, colleagues and practitioners, to this clinical masterclass on oak, Quercus robur. Today, we are addressing one of the most novel yet clinically precious emotional patterns encountered in holistic practice, the relentless struggle of unyielding fighter. We have titled this lecture Unyielding Strength, Over Effort and the Restoration of Limits, because the oak matrix represents a state where an individual pushes past all human limits, ignoring physical strain and fatigue to carry heavy burdens for others. Over the course of this masterclass, we will deconstruct the architecture of this emotional state, analyze Dr. Bach's foundational vision, map its botanical signatures, trace its developmental trajectory, evaluate its somatic expressions, examine clinical case files, and master its differential diagnosis. Let's begin. To understand oak accurately, we must position it within Dr. Bach's original classification framework. Like willow, oak sits firmly within group 6, addressing the emotional terrain of despondency and despair. However, while willow targets externalized blame and victimhood, oak represents the complete opposite behavior, taking on every burden, never complaining, and fighting on against all odds. The despair of oak is not expressed through surrendering or sulking. It is masked by relentless, unyielding struggle. While other Group 6 remedies, like elm, experience a sudden loss of confidence under pressure, oak quietly plods along day after day until total collapse occurs. This distinction is critical for accurate clinical prescribing. At the heart of the oak state lies that we call the vector effort. When individuals face severe long-term adversity, their internal drive dictates their direction. In a goal state, the vector turns downwards into surrender and hopelessness. But in oak, the vector remains aggressively active. The individual refuses to give up, continuing to fight and hope against hope regardless of the physical cost. The oak patient lives in a heroic paradox. They act as an unshakable pillar for family, friends, and colleagues, yet they refuse to admit when their own tank is completely empty. Our limit, our ultimate therapeutic objective with oak is not to break their noble strength, but to restore their awareness of human limits, helping them recognize that resting is not quitting. Let us examine the architecture of unyielding struggle. Unlike remedies that express distress through complaining or emotional outbursts, oak is a quiet, steadfast state. It is the quiet strength that carries families through crisis and keeps organizations functioning during disasters. The negative oak individual carries a perpetual internal monologue. I must carry this burden. I cannot let anyone down. They measure their worth by their ability to endure strain and fulfill duty. Crucially, even when experiencing severe despondency or physical illness, they refuse to halt their labors. They hide their pain and exhaustion, quietly plodding along day after day. Deconstructing the pillar archetype reveals a profound psychological mechanism. Because oak individuals appear so solid, steady, and capable, those around them naturally lean on them. Friends, family, and employers routinely dump their problems, worries, and workloads onto the oak person's shoulders. The oak individual willingly accepts these loads out of a powerful sense of determination and duty. However, By constantly prioritizing the needs and cares of others, they completely ignore their own physiological and psychological distress signals. They hide their migraines, their joint pain, and their burnout, wearing a mask of strength until their body forcibly shuts down. A defining hallmark of the oak personality is their incredible capacity for persistent hope. Where other states sink into apathy, oak maintains an active driving optimism. If an oak individual falls ill or faces a massive business crisis, they do not sit down and weep. They actively seek solutions, research treatments, and try alternative methods because they possess an unshakable conviction that a solution can be found. They hope against hope. While this determination is a heroic human trait, without remedy support, it can turn into a trap where the person relentlessly fights battles long after their physical body has run out of vital fuel. Practitioners must understand the extreme vulnerability hidden beneath the oak exterior. An oak state does not fade away gradually, it snaps because they lack an effective early warning system. For self-care, they push past warning signs like severe fatigue, chronic pain, and insomnia. They view taking break as a moral failure. Consequently, they run at full speed until they hit a wall, resulting in sudden nervous breakdowns, acute cardiac events, or total physical collapse. Like a massive oak tree that stands firm through endless winds until a fierce gale snaps a major limb, the oak individual endures massive pressure until their systemic threshold is breached. Let us trace the dynamic behavioral flowchart of the oak loop. It begins with burden accrual. The oak individual takes on enormous responsibilities. Step 2 is fatigue suppression. As strain mounts, they hide their distress and refuse to ask for help. Step 3 unyielding struggle. They quietly plod along day after day, fighting against monumental odds. Step 4 is the depletion of reserves. Their vital strength drains while they continue to work at 100% capacity. And finally, step 5 is reached. The body or mind suffers a sudden catastrophic breakdown. The oak remedy intervenes in this loop before step 5 occurs, instilling wisdom and appropriate boundaries. Unlike remedies that express distress through drama or calls for attention, oak operates through stoic concealment. Stoic endurance is the primary mechanism of the negative oak state. In the consultation room, these patients do not ask for sympathy. They will casually mention that they are sleeping 3 hours a night, managing a sick family member, and working 70 hours a week, framing it simply as what needs to be done. They overfunction continuously. As clinicians, we must look beyond their calm, uncomplaining delivery to spot the profound physiological exhaustion underneath. The social and organizational impact of the oak pattern is significant. In the family life, the oak individual becomes a central pillar. Family members get conditioned to dumping their emotional and logistical burdens onto them, knowing the oak will manage everything. In professional setting, oak manifests as the workhorse, the executive or manager who takes on failed projects, works through weekends, and shields their team from strain. However, this creates a toxic dynamic where others stop taking responsibility because they know the oak will fix it. The clinical boundary requires teaching the oak patient that allowing others to carry their own burdens is essential for everyone's growth. What you are looking at here is the classic oak exhaustion paradox, the hidden crisis behind every oak personality. Notice the huge gap between these bars. Up top, their perceived duty and workload sits at 95%. They carry the world on their shoulders and refuse to let anyone down. To everyone else, they project a 90% outer facet of strength. They look unshakable, so people keep dumping responsibilities on them. But look at the bottom bar. Their actual physiological reserves are down at 20%. They are running on empty, operating purely sheer willpower and adrenal drive. Because oak personalities don't complain or slow down, they don't fade away gently. They snap like a rigid tree in storm. Our clinical goal with the oak remedy isn't to break their strength, but to close this dangerous gap, teaching them that honoring physical limits and taking rest is what actually preserves their ability to serve. Let's look at Dr. Edward Bach's original text directly from the 12 Healers, which serves as our diagnostic compass. Notice his precise wording. For those who are struggling and fighting a good fight, they keep on trying one thing after another, though their case may seem hopeless. Bach highlights four core elements here. First, the active struggle against adversity. Second, relentless trial of new solutions based on inner hope. Third, irritation not at the illness itself, but at how illness interferes with their ability to perform duty and help others. And fourth, their innate bravery and steadfast nature. Bash honored the oak personality, recognizing that they need support to keep their noble fight from destroying their physical body. Here we look directly at Dr. Edward Bach's original foundational text from the 12 Healers, which serves as our diagnostic compass for oak. Notice how Bach captures the exact spirit of this remedy. For those who are struggling and fighting strongly to get well or in connection with the affairs of their daily life, they will go on trying one thing after another. They will fight on. What makes the oak pattern so distinct here is that even when their case seems hopeless, they refuse to surrender. They don't lose hope and they don't stop trying remedies, treatments, or solutions. Their primary frustration with being sick is not the physical pain, it's that illness interferes with their ability to perform their duties and help others. Dr. Batch deeply admired these brave, steadfast individuals. He designed this remedy not to break their fighting spirit, but to support them to their relentless drive doesn't end up destroying their physical body. This slide brings us to the core shift that occurs when a patient takes oak, moving from a distorted negative state into a transmuted positive state. On the left, we have the negative unyielding state. This is rigid strength, where the person ignores physical fatigue, drives themselves through compulsive duty, and risks sudden catastrophic breakdown because they refuse to yield. When we give the oak remedy, we transition to the positive transmuted state on the right. Notice that oak doesn't strip away their natural strength or bravery. Instead, it infuses their strength with wisdom. They move from rigid resistance to flexible endurance. They learn healthy boundary setting, wise delegation, and effortless inner resilience. Ultimately, the transformed oak individual stays a steadfast pillar, but learns that stepping back to rest and accept help is what allows their strength to truly endure. Moving into the next module, botanical signatures and doctrine, we turn our attention from psychological profile on the oak personality to the living source itself. Quercus rubor, the English oak. In Bach Flower Therapy, understanding the physical architecture and growth patterns of the plant provides deep insights into its therapeutic energetics, a concept historically known as the doctrine of signatures. The English oak is a master class in nature's structural design. It's a tree defined by dense, unyielding timber, massive root systems, and an incredible capacity to stand through centuries of harsh weather without faltering. By analyzing how Quercus rubor interacts with its environment, how it grows, where its strengths lie, and where its rigid structure eventually reaches its physical limits, we can decode the exact vibrational frequency it offers as us clinically, transforming rigid, relentless endurance into adaptive, sustainable resilience. On this slide, Quercus rubor Earthly Resilience, we explore the physical attributes of the English oak that directly mirror the oak personality pattern. Quercus rubor is renowned for its majestic longevity and density. It grows steadily over centuries, accumulating dense, incredibly hard timber capable of standing through generations of severe storms and harsh environmental conditions. In holistic energetics, this physical density translates directly into the human realm. Like the English oak, individuals requiring this remedy possesses immense psychological density and stamina. They stand firm through life's harshest personal and professional weather, carrying immense burdens for years without bending easily. However, this same density means that when they do reach their absolute limit, they do not show gradual weakness. They face structural strain. Understanding this botanical foundation helps us see why oak individuals are built for immense endurance, but ultimately require the remedy to keep that endurance from turning into rigid, unbending exhaustion. Moving on to acorns and catkins floral signals, we look at the botanical details that complete the signature of Quercus rubor. First, we examine the male catkins, hanging delicate yellow blooms that emerge in spring. These soft, flexible flowers signify the receptive, gentle emotional energy needed to balance the oak's heavy, rigid wood structure. Second, the acorn capsules represent deep grounding. These heavy seeds are anchored securely in protective capsules, reflecting long-term potential stability and enduring structural growth. Finally, the remedy is prepared using the solar method, placing the flowers in water under the vibrant spring sun. This potent process captures light and buoyancy, infusing a sense of lightness directly into the heavy, overburdened, and rigid structures of the oak patient. Together, these floral signals teaches us how strength can coexist with softness and light. Turning to rooting and wood dynamics, we look closer at the structural mechanics of the oak tree and what it teaches us about human health. The oak tree sinks a massive taproot deep into the earth, granting it incredible structural stability against fierce gales. It anchors itself so firmly that simple winds cannot uproot it. However, because oak wood is fundamentally unyielding and dense, When extreme force strikes, the branches break rather than bend. In clinical practice, this directly mirrors the oak personality. They have deep roots and immense mental stability, but their rigid refusal to yield under pressure makes them susceptible to sudden structural or nervous breakdowns. The oak flower essence imparts the crucial energetic flexibility, teaching the individual to yield gracefully under heavy stress so they can weather the storm without snapping. Now we transition into module number 6, developmental trajectory and etiology. Up to this point, we have explored the psychological symptoms and botanical signatures of oak. But as clinicians, we must ask the deeper question: how does an individual become an oak? Oak traits rarely develop overnight. They are forged to over decades. In this module, we will explore the developmental origin story, looking specifically at how early childhood conditions, family expectations, and learned coping mechanisms shape the adult oak defense pattern. By understanding the root causes of their unyielding need to be strong, we gain a much clearer picture of how to support their recovery and help them unlearn these rigid survival strategies. Examining early childhood conditionings, we see the four primary relational dynamics that lay the foundation for the oak personality. First is premature parentification. These individuals were forced to step into adult roles far too early, often caring for siblings or managing household affairs due to family illness, poverty, or parental instability. Second, they internalized conditional love, absorbing the belief that approval and affection were not inherent rights but had to be earned exclusively through high performance and unbroken reliability. Third, they experienced a strict prohibition of tears, raised in environments where showing vulnerability or crying was shamed as weakness or unacceptable collapse. Finally, they were cast in the family hero role, the anchor child designed to hold the entire family structure together during crisis. Together, these early experiences teach the child that survival and love depend on absolute self-reliance and stoicism, a pattern they carry directly into adulthood. On progression to chronic oak state, we trace the five distinct evolutionary stages through which this pattern develops across a lifetime. It begins with the childhood hero, where the young individual learns extreme self-reliance and absorbs emotional or practical strain within the family unit. Moving into early adult duty, they establish a professional and social reputation as the reliable workhorse who never complains. By midlife stream, their responsibilities compound exponentially as they accumulate heavy career demands alongside aging family care burdens. This transitions into ignored somatics, where they consciously suppress chronic physical pain, fatigue, and sleep deficits to keep functioning. Finally, without intervention, this timeline ends in acute cracking, a systemic breakdown or health crisis that forces a total halt, mandating clinical intervention. Mapping this progression helps us identify exactly where on this timeline our patients are currently standing. Examining ego defense mechanisms in oak, we look at two primary psychological strategies these individuals use to maintain their rigid momentum. The first is reaction formation. When deep inner feelings of vulnerability, helplessness, or intense physical exhaustion arise, the oak personality unconsciously transforms them into their polar opposite, an overt, hyper capable display of supreme strength and invincibility. The second mechanism is suppression and denial. Here, the individual consciously shows clear somatic warning signals, such as severe migraines, chronic fatigue, or joint stiffness, completely out of awareness. By refusing to acknowledge physical pain, they ensure uninterrupted task execution. Understanding these psychological defenses reveals that their apparent invulnerability is actually a fragile shield designed to keep burnout at bay. Now we move into Module 7, Somatic Expressions and Manifestations. As we have seen in our analysis of oak defenses, when psychological distress and extreme fatigue are continuously suppressed, the body eventually pays the bill. The mind may refuse to admit weakness, but the physical organism cannot override biological limits indefinitely. In this module, we will explore the specific physical pathologies and somatic breakdown patterns that result from long-term unyielding strain. Understanding these physical indicators allows us as clinicians to recognize the oak state in patients who may come to us complaining of bodily ailments long before they are ready to admit to psychological burnouts. Focusing on musculoskeletal and cardiac strain, we examine the direct physical consequences of chronic suppression. First, we observe structural rigidity. Severe unyielding tension in the shoulders, neck, and lumbar spine, often progressing to spinal disc issues and chronic osteoarthritis from literally carrying excess weight and burdens. Next is cardiovascular stress, where sustained high cortisol, sympathetic drive, and a complete lack of parasympathetic recovery lead to essential hypertension and an elevated resting heart rate. Finally, this chronic overdrive culminates in adrenal depletion, manifesting as chronic fatigue syndrome, stubborn insomnia due to an inability to wind down, and sudden immune collapse that leaves the body vulnerable to severe infections. When taking a patient's history, these physical symptoms often serves as primary red flags for an underlying oak dynamic. Looking at the breakdown of somatic symptom distribution, clinical observations show a heavy dominance of structural and cardiovascular complaints in unyielding oak states. Musculoskeletal stiffness makes up the largest proportion at 40%, reflecting how physical tension directly mirrors psychological rigidity and overeffort. Hypertension and cardiac tension follows closely at 30%, representing the ongoing strain placed on the vascular system due to chronic stress drive. Adrenal fatigue and sleep deficit accounts for 20%, making the systemic exhaustion that inevitably sets in when restoration is repeatedly delayed. Finally, the remaining 10% consist of other stress manifestations, such as localized digestive distress or immune dip. Recognizing this distribution helps us quickly identify which organ systems are bearing the brunt of the patient's continuous unyielding workload. Here on physical versus emotional stress signs, we contrast the initial warning indicators against advanced decompensation across four key domains. In the musculoskeletal domain, early neck and shoulder girdle tightness eventually degenerates into severe lumbar spasms, disc herniation, and joint lock. Cardiovascularly, mild stress-induced blood pressure spikes escalate over time into sustained stage 2 hypertension, angina, or arrhythmia. Within the neurological sphere, what starts as nocturnal tension headaches progresses to sudden vertigo, debilitating migraines, and mental blackouts. Finally, from a behavioral perspective, the subtle refusal of weekend breaks hardens into a complete inability to stop working, even when bedridden. Recognizing this trajectory allows us as practitioners to intervene long before a patient transitions from subtle strain to acute physical breakdown. We are now entering Module 8, Differential Diagnosis Matrix. In clinical practice, misprescribing often occurs when states of exhaustion, perfectionism, or overwork are blurred together. To prescribe Bach Flower remedies with precision, we must clearly distinguish oak from its closest clinical lookup remedies, elm, rockwater, centaury, and olive. While all of these remedies present with overlapping features like fatigue or hyperresponsibility, their underlying psychological drivers, onset dynamics, and relational boundaries are radically different. In this module, we will break down those key diagnostic differentiators so you can isolate the true oak state with absolute confidence. Examining oak versus elm, rockwater, and centaury, we contrast their core drivers and reactions to heavy workloads. Oak is driven by absolute duty and persistent struggle, relentlessly pushing forward and refusing to stop, despite severe physical pain. In contrast, Elm is motivated by altruistic responsibility, but experiences a temporary crisis of confidence when feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of their task. Rockwater operates out of perfectionism and self-discipline, adopting extreme self-denial based on rigid personal ideals rather than external duty. Finally, Centauri stems from weak willpower and a desire to please others, taking on excess work simply because they cannot say no due to passive submission. Dissecting these distinct internal motivations ensures that we target the precise psychological mechanism at play. To operationalize this in clinical practice, we turn to key clinical diagnostic questions. These four targeted inquiries allow us to quickly evaluate an oak dynamic during an intake assessment. Question number one. Do you feel frustrated when illness or fatigue forces you to pause your work or caregiving duties? This targets their underlying resentment toward physical limitations. Question number two. Do family members or co-workers frequently rely on you to handle crisis situations? Which assesses their role as the indispensable pillar. Question number three. When you are completely exhausted, do you rest or do you force yourself to keep going? Highlighting their automatic compulsion to over-effort. And finally, question number four. Do you find it difficult or embarrassing to ask others for help when overwhelmed? Pinpointing their vulnerability resistance. Clear affirmative responses across these line items firmly establish the need for the oak. Moving into Module 9, Case Studies and Clinical Application, we transition from diagnostic framework to practical implementation. Theoretical knowledge comes alive when observed through real-world clinical presentations and therapeutic outcomes with oak essence. In this section, we will analyze distinct case profiles, examining how the oak state manifests in patient histories, the subtle interplay of physical and emotional symptoms, and the transformational shift that occurs post-administration. Pay close attention to how restoring the oak dynamic allows patients to dismantle hyperindependence and embrace sustainable resilience. Looking at clinical case 1, executive burnout. We examine a 52-year-old corporate director managing a high-stakes corporate restructuring, sleeping just 4 hours nightly. He presented with advanced somatic signs, stage 2 hypertension, and severe cervical stiffness. His core issue was an absolute refusal to surrender under pressure. He was prescribed a combination of oak and elm. Oak to break the compulsion to struggle endlessly, and elm to alleviate the acute sensation of being overwhelmed by huge responsibilities. Within 4 weeks, the patient demonstrated significant behavioral shifting, acknowledging his physical limits, successfully delegating major responsibilities to senior managers, and prioritizing 7 hours of sleep nightly. In clinical case 2, caregiver exhaustion, we review a 44-year-old mother working full-time while simultaneously serving as the primary caregiver for an ailing parent. She repeatedly refused to respite care, insisting she must handle everything herself without complaint. Her regimen combined oak plus pine, oak to break the relentless urge to push beyond physical boundaries, and pine to address the underlying guilt associated with taking time for herself. Following treatment, the patient released her toxic guilt around self-care, accepted part-time respite assistance, and experienced complete relief from her chronic migraines. Turning to clinical treatment outcome rates, we evaluate patient recovery matrices gathered across cases of chronic over-effort. Notably, clinical evaluation shows an 85% success rate in boundary restoration, specifically in establishing healthy workload boundaries within 6 weeks of OAK administration. Rather than stripping patients of their inherent strength or drive, treatment shifts their energy baseline. Patients report feeling a renewed sense of strength that is grounded and sustainable rather than powered by forced adrenaline and willpower. We have reached our final section, Module 10, Therapeutic Integration and Dosing. Now that we have established the clinical pathology, differential diagnosis, and case applications, we must address practical delivery. In this closing module, we cover precise administration protocols, potencies, synergetic remedy combinations, and final clinical conclusions. Establishing clear dosing regimens and supporting remedies ensures the patient safely integrates their newfound psychological boundaries while maintaining physical stamina. Here, on dosage, potency, and synergies, we detail the precise protocols for applying oak in practice. For standard dosing, administer 2 drops of oak mother stock in water taken 4 times daily. During states of acute physical exhaustion, combine this directly with olive stock drops. Regarding key synergies, pair oak with elm to relieve sudden situational overload, olive to address cellular deep physical exhaustion, or rock water when dealing with underlying rigid perfectionism. Finally, for administration beyond oral intake, oak can be applied topically over key muscle tension areas, such as the neck, shoulders, and lower back, or added to therapeutic bath water during acute physical burnout crisis to promote profound physical release. Thank you all so much for your participation throughout this clinical masterclass on the Oak Bach Flower Remedy. We have covered a comprehensive range of clinical insights today, from recognizing the strong, unyielding, duty-bound profile of oak to underlying its key physical manifestations, dosage, dosage protocols, and therapeutic synergies. At this point, I would like to open up the floor to any questions, clinical case queries, and observations you might have regarding the practical application of oak in your practice. Please comment in the comment section